Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today. So let's start off talking about NXT, and we've got to talk about Walter. Of course, Walter coming over to the United States, coming over to NXT 2.0 was considered to be very exciting, and I still am excited about it. It was something I think a lot of people didn't think was going to happen when it came to Walter permanently moving to the United States. He had said on several occasions it was never going to happen. He lived in Austria. He was happy being based in Europe. That's why he was signed to be part of the NXT UK brand. But things changed. His life changed. He quit his job. He met someone else, and now he's living in the United States. And like myself, many pro wrestling fans are excited to see Walter regularly in NXT in the US and eventually on the main roster. There's a lot of potential there, right? Right. Things may have changed slightly because Walter is getting a name change, because Walter has apparently been given the new ring name of Gunther Stark. Now, you may hear that and go, oh, why is WWE changing the name of Walter? But it gets way worse than that. Way worse than that. Now, last night's NXT 2.0 main event saw Walter defeat Roderick Strong in a singles action. It was actually a really good match, really fun main event. Now, after the match, Walter interrupted the ring announcer and declared that the winner of the match was Gunther instead of Walter. The show went off the air with Imperium, Walter, I guess Gunther, NXT Tag Team Champions Marcel Barthel and Fabian Eichner brawling with the Diamond Mine, that being Roderick Strong and the Creed brothers. Now, people knew this was probably going to happen because on January the 13th, WWE filed to trademark a Gunther Stark name on that date. Now, the use description filed with the United States Patent and Trademark Office was for general pro wrestling and sports entertainment use, the same description they often file when it comes to other ring name trademarks. The apparent name change is receiving a lot of criticism on social media, as Gunther Stark was also the name of a U-boat commander who served in the Second World War for Germany. As you can tell, that is not the best thing to be associated with whatsoever, especially for a major publicly traded company like WWE. Why would you name a prominent figure, a prominent wrestler and prominent superstar in your company with the same name as that? On top of that, a simple Google search reveals that. If you type in Gunther Stark to Google, you see that horrific name and its association in history, something I'm sure WWE does not want to be associated with. Now, previously, there had been some speculation that Gunther Stark might be a name of a new NXT superstar linked to the injured Zoe Stark, considering they have the same last name. But it now looks like this could be the new ring name for the leader of Imperium. We don't know if he's just going to be Gunther or he's going to be Gunther Stark. We don't know. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Walter is now working on the main NXT brand full-time and has moved to the United States. Before last night's main event, NXT featured a backstage segment where Walter congratulated Eichner and Barthel for carrying the Imperium flag while he was away. He declared that Imperium now has a new mission, which involves dominating NXT the same way they did with NXT UK. Now, it should still be noted that WWE has not changed Walter's name on the official website as of the recording of this video. He is also still listed as Walter on his social media pages, at least as of right now. So, like everyone, the name change, take out the historical connotations. The name change sucks. And it's typical WWE of changing names for the sake of changing names. And changing names, the reason they have changed this name is because they want to own the name and Walter's name. They went for a brief period, WWE, and this goes back to the changing of NXT, but they went for a brief period where they actually allowed people to use the name that they had used prior to coming to WWE. The names like Samoa Joe, Adam Cole, etc., etc., etc. You know, that's what they had done for a little while. Not all the time in NXT, of course, because you had names like Seth Rollins, Tyler Black, and you had names like Dean Ambrose, Jon Moxley. You had names like, Kevin Owens, Kevin Steen, and, Al Generico turned into Sami Zayn. So they weren't doing that always, but historically, WWE likes to own the name, so they like to get you to change the name, and they've obviously gone back to that process. So I get it. I get them changing the name because they don't own the name Walter. He's used that name throughout the entirety, pretty much, of his pro wrestling career. Not the whole career, but for the majority of his career. It's what he's best known for. And they're looking at it as, okay, now he's moving over to the United States. We want to own that character. We want to own the name. We can't obviously own the name Walter because he's used it elsewhere. We're going to we're going to change it. We're going to do something different. So it's like, okay, if that's what you're going to do, fine. But at least do a Google search. I mean, just the fact that that name, again, is associated with some of the most horrific history, in humankind on top of that. And also as well, he's an Austrian. He's from Austria. Like, it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. And I don't know if they think that maybe them changing it to just Gunther changes things, or if he's eventually going to become Gunther Stark. But I can't see a scenario. I cannot see a scenario where they will persist with this name. Maybe they will just change it to Gunther and maybe be like, oh, we got away with it. But even still, it's out there. It's out there what his original name was going to be. It's out there that he was going to be called Gunther Stark, and that has the historical connotation with it. So, and it makes you wonder, where did they get that name from in the first place? This can't just be a name they've just picked off the top of their head. I mean, was it a name that Walter himself suggested? But again, why didn't we've heard this process that they get given a list of maybe 10 names or something of that nature. They get given a list of all of these names, and sometimes the wrestlers themselves can pitch certain names, and WWE will go, yes, yes, no, 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 or they give them a list of names. Who came up with that name? Because it's not a name you just pick off the top of your head. So I don't know. And I'm not trying to imply something of, I'm not trying to imply something malicious, shall we say here, but it just seems way too much of a coincidence for me. Way too much. And I might be wrong, but no. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. Keith Lee chimed in with his views on Twitter and said, quote, man, if what I'm hearing is real, Paul Walter. This is what Lance Storm also said, quote, need I remind everyone, Vince saw me as a partying, dancing guy. Gunther is too much of a stretch all of a sudden. And again, like Lance Storm, I would say to that, no one, I don't think people are bitching too much about the name change. Again, like I just said, name changes, it's a WWE thing. It is what it is, right? It is what it is. That's what they've always done. I don't care about that. Sometimes names suck. The Viking Experience had to get changed into the Viking Raiders, right? When they were called the War Raiders in NXT, because you can't have war in a name, heaven forbid. But it's the connotation with this one. It's different. I think people might be annoyed at the name change anyway, but when you look into the historical nature and connotations linked to the name change, that's the problem, Lance, I would say. That's the problem. And you can't argue, you're going to have a guy from Austria that's going to have a name that's linked to World War II. That is ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous, and it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. So I think it has to change. Whether or not it will, WWE, I suppose. Let's talk about WrestleMania. Of course, it had been thought and teased we were going to get a title versus title match between Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar. Of course, Roman Reigns is the current Universal Champion. Brock Lesnar is the current WWE Champion. Doesn't look like that's actually going to be the case. Now, Reigns and Lesnar are still scheduled to face off at WrestleMania next year, but it doesn't look like it's going to be title versus title. Now, WWE recently teased the idea of a title versus title match between Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. However, the reality is that both titles being on the line at a potential WrestleMania 38 encounter is not the current plan. On the latest edition of the Wrestling Observer radio show, Dave Meltzer answered a mailbag question about a recent segment where WWE pushed the possibility of them competing with both titles on the line. This occurred in their SmackDown confrontation when Reigns returned after being diagnosed with COVID-19. However, Meltzer was told there are no plans for that to actually happen. Instead, it was just done at the time because they both happened to have the belts. Therefore, it made sense to tease the match. However, this isn't the direction that WWE is going with this storyline. It has been reported numerous times that Brock Lesnar facing Roman Reigns at WrestleMania is the current plan. For that to happen without both titles being on the line, of course, one of them has to drop their respective title between now and WrestleMania. Of course, both men are in championship matches at the Royal Rumble later this month, which could provide such an opportunity. Roman Reigns is defending the Universal Championship against former Shield partner Seth Rollins. Meanwhile, Brock Lesnar will be putting the WWE Championship on the line in singles action against Bobby Lashley at the event. So this is quite curious. I thought they were going down this route because it makes the match bigger. We've seen Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns happen once. Obviously, it was going to happen twice. It was meant to happen again at day one. It didn't because of the COVID diagnosis when it comes to Roman Reigns. But we've seen it once, and I thought, how do you make that bigger? Well, instead of one title being on the line, you have two titles being on the line. Title versus title. They've done it with the women's titles, but it's always been fought, hasn't it? Even when it came to the original brand extension back in 2002 that at one point we would get, this title versus title match. I mean, at the time when the initial brand extension happened, we had the Undisputed Champion, which was Triple H, and that champion went between both shows. Eventually, of course, they split off into the WWE Championship being on SmackDown and the World Heavyweight Championship being on Raw. But the idea was that eventually we would get to a WrestleMania main event with both titles being on the line. And I thought, you've got a two-night WrestleMania, you've got Reigns versus Brock, which is still the biggest match that they can do, but how do you make it bigger considering you did it already in October at Crown Jewel? You put both bouts on the line. It's easy. It's easy storytelling and it's big box office. But it would appear that WWE isn't going to do that. So what are they going to do? Well, reportedly, the previous plan was that Seth Rollins would win the WWE Championship at day one. He would then defend the WWE Championship against Big E at WrestleMania. Now, we have heard these reports that plans actually haven't changed when it comes to WrestleMania. So if plans haven't changed, it would imply we are still going to get Seth Rollins versus Big E for a championship at WrestleMania. The difficult thing to figure out now is what championship? Because Seth Rollins is facing Roman Reigns at the Royal Rumble for the Universal title. I just can't wrap my head around that Roman Reigns, the longest at this point, the longest reigning Universal Champion in WWE history, the guy that hasn't been pinned since August of 2020, I can't wrap my head around he would lose the title to Seth Rollins at the Royal Rumble. Not putting Seth Rollins down, not saying the Royal Rumble isn't a big event, it's a stadium show, but you save that pinfall for WrestleMania and you make a new star out of it. Seth Rollins doesn't need to be made, he's already been made. And to pivot to Reigns versus Lesnar, with Lesnar being the WWE Champion, of course Reigns is going to win the match at WrestleMania, but I see him just continuing on the Universal Championship reign. So it would imply that Brock has to drop the title at the Rumble. So Bobby Lashley beats Brock, maybe because Roman Reigns gets involved, or maybe because the Usos get involved, maybe because Paul Heyman once again turns on Brock Lesnar. Maybe we could see an angle whereby actually, Heyman is Lesnar's advocate, and the turn they were going to do at day one with Heyman turning on turning on Lesnar, maybe that happens instead at the Rumble, where Reigns comes out, Heyman turns on Brock, and Bobby Lashley gets the win. I think that makes the most sense, maybe, and then maybe it's Bobby Lashley versus Seth Rollins versus Big E at WrestleMania. I don't know. But I won't lie, I'm maybe a little bit disappointed. I like the idea of a title versus title match happening at WrestleMania, but WWE's going in a different direction. This is an interesting story when it comes to WWE signing potentially a top independent wrestler. We know WWE is moving away from signing independent wrestlers, but not completely, because it would appear that WWE reportedly has strong interest in signing Roxy. The 20-year-old worked the WWE tryout at the Performance Center in December, along with Monster Factory Project, Notorious Mimi, and many others. Word is now that Roxy performed well at the camp, according to Fightful Select. It was noted there is a significant push within WWE to get Roxy signed to a contract even before she performed well at the tryout camp. The December WWE tryouts were so big that WWE busted the tryout competitors in and gave Performance Center trainees a few days off. Regarding Roxy, in the past there have been cases where WWE has passed on much younger talents because they were, quote, too young, but it seems like that's not the case anymore because, of course, WWE's profile is to get younger wrestlers and get younger competitors from the NBA, the NHL, college. They have the college NIL system now in place. Now, obviously, Roxy is actually quite well known to many pro wrestling fans because she became the inaugural Ring of Honor Women's World Champion back in December, and she just recently dropped the title to Deonna Purrazzo this past Thursday on Impact Wrestling. As I mentioned, at the time when we spoke about that title change, I felt that Ring of Honor were doing that because they felt that Roxy was likely to sign with WWE after attending this tryout, and it looks like it is going to be the case. Now, a source pointed out that this main event match between Roxy and Purrazzo as evidence of WWE potentially signing Roxy being a, quote, no-brainer. However, that same source did mention to Fightful how they thought hiring AEW star Wheeler Yuta was also a no-brainer last year, but he was not signed. So she's going to make her MLW debut at Friday's Blood and Thunder event in Dallas, Texas. Whether or not she will sign with WWE, I don't know. I have the feeling that she will probably end up there. As I mentioned earlier on, WWE is going for younger at this point. It's not completely ruling out pro wrestlers from that list, but so young that they can kind of still mold them in the image of how they want WWE to perform. I think they look at people like Sasha Banks, like Bayley, even like Becky Lynch, even though they were pro wrestlers and they had an independent wrestling background, they were so young they could still mold them. And I think that's what they're looking at with these pro wrestlers now. So I think Roxy will end up to WWE, and I think it'll be a very good signing for them. Finally, while Veer is coming to Monday Night Raw, his former tag team partner has come to NXT again because Grayson Waller has new muscle on NXT 2.0. Now, last night's show opened with LA Knight calling Waller to the ring for a fight. Of course, this came after last week's show ended with AJ Styles defeating Waller in the main event, then bringing back Knight to get payback on Waller for some of his recent actions. But eventually it ended with SURAV Garaja returning as Grayson Waller's insurance policy on WWE NXT this past week. Now, of course, you may remember SURAV from the Indus Sher tag team of NXT. SURAV began teaming with Veer Mahan at NXT live events back in September of 2018. They were managed by Robert Stone and Malcolm Bivens at times. SURAV and Veer debuted on NXT TV by attacking Riddle in March of 2020, but the team was later disbanded that summer and Veer was brought to the main roster. Veer and SURAV later teamed with Drew McIntyre for the six-man win over Jinder Mahal and the Singh brothers at the WWE Superstar Spectacle in January of 2021. Now, SURAV actually returned to action at the 205 live tapings held on January 11th in a match against Odyssey Jones, but that match never aired on television as Jones suffered an injury and had to be helped to the back. So it looks like Grayson Waller's got some insurance policy, and that's what they're calling it going forward. I just think it's funny that SURAV has been off of television for so long, and now he's back in NXT. Meanwhile, Veer is still coming to Raw. And do with that what you will. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. Be sure to smash a like on the video. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner. And AEW and Impact Wrestling news videos are still to come today. Speak to you again soon. Peace.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.